So we've discussed the profit maximizing rule and what that looks like on a graph for a firm in a perfectly competitive market. And really the hallmark of the perfectly competitive market is that it has this flat marginal revenue curve, right? Which also serves as the price curve, which also serves as the demand curve. What are people willing to pay for the product? They're willing to pay the price, the market price. So we have this flat marginal revenue curve here. Um, and that's what lets us know that this graph is a graph for a firm in a perfectly competitive market. So now, that's all fine and good, but sometimes a firm can't make a profit, particularly in the short run. If they can't make a profit in the long run, then they should just stop being a firm in this market, right? But in the short run, that's not necessarily true. So if we think about, for example, an ice cream firm, an ice cream shop in the winter, right? There may be days when it's worth it to shut down in the winter. So, like January 5th, it might be the case that this firm can't make enough money to make it make sense to hire someone to work that day. It doesn't make sense to turn the lights on and pay the electricity bill for that day. But at the same time, it doesn't mean they need to go out of business, because come July, they're going to make a ton of money, right? They're going to make plenty to make up for the fact that they weren't making much in January. But in the short run, they may need to shut down as an ice cream shop. And how you decide that is that the firm is going to shut down if, as I've alluded to, they can't cover their variable costs. So, what are your variable costs? These are the costs of doing business today, right? So it doesn't matter that you have your rent. You're going to have to pay your rent whether you open or don't open today, right? Those fixed costs, you have to pay those anyway. So really what you're thinking about when you're thinking about today, should we open our ice cream shop today on January 5th? You're going to think about, if I open, how much ice cream will I sell? How much revenue will I get? And will that be enough to make it make sense to pay the guy to stand there at the counter all day, and to pay the electricity to have the lights on and have the churns running and have everything going, right? So, and if you can't sell enough ice cream to even pay your employee for the day, then keep your employee at home, right? Doesn't make sense to operate in the short run if you can't cover your variable costs. And again, shutting down is not the same as going out of business and exiting the industry. You'll go out of business and exit the industry if you can't cover your costs in the long run. This is just a short run decision, right? This is just January, knowing that June will come or July will come as the ice cream shop. So on your graph, it looks like this. So here's your ice cream shop. They have their marginal cost curve, their average variable cost, their average total cost curve that we're used to looking at. When will you shut down, and when will you open? Right? So if you're looking at today, deciding should I have my guy go in and try to sell ice cream today? The question you're asking yourself is, what would be my variable costs if I operated today? What would be my total costs if I operated today? Right? Um, and and you will shut down if you're not going to make enough revenue to cover your variable costs. So this green area at the top, this is the no-brainer area. This is the ice cream shop in July, when the price, your marginal revenue, is so high that you're covering your total cost. You're paying your rent and you're paying the guy to be at the shop today. You're able to cover all of your total costs with the amount of revenue you make from selling ice cream in July, right? No brainer. Open your doors. People are going to come. You're going to be able to pay your bills. Then you've got this strange area here. We'll come back to that. And then the red zone down at the bottom. So the red zone is another sort of no-brainer area where we're going to shut down today. This is January at the ice cream shop. This is when the price, what people are willing to pay for ice cream today, is so low that we would not make enough money selling ice cream today to even cover our variable costs. So notice this red zone is all the area beneath the bottom of our variable cost curve. right? So if we're not even going to make enough money to cover our variable costs to pay the guy to stand there today, then we're going to keep that guy home. Let's not open the doors today. This is the day we're not going to sell ice cream because it's definitely not worth it. So we've got the definitely no-brainer, let's open the doors area, that's the green area above your average total cost curve, right? If our price is above the average total cost, we're definitely able to cover all of our costs, and have some money left over maybe. Let's go. Let's open the doors. If our price is below our variable costs, we can't even pay the guy to work there today, then let's shut down. Let's not be open on January 5th, right? Then you've got this yellow zone. The yellow zone's a little strange. So the yellow zone is where the price is between your average variable cost and your average total cost curve. So you can pay the guy to stand there today. You're making enough money to cover your variable costs. You can pay your electricity today. You can pay your labor costs, your wages today, but you're not making enough to cover your rent. So the price is not high enough to cover your total costs, which includes your fixed costs, but it is high enough to cover your variable costs. What will you do then? So the little tag out to the right says the firm will operate at a loss in this case. Why will you operate if you can't pay your rent? And the answer to that question is that you can pay part of your rent at least in that area, right? So if you're in the yellow zone, you're able to pay your bills for today. You're able to pay the guy to work there. You're able to pay your electricity, and the price is high enough that you have a little bit left over that you can put towards your rent. So if you operate today, you're actually in better shape. Sure, at the end of the day, you haven't been able to pay all your bills, but you're in better shape than if you had closed your doors today, because you actually made a little bit more money than you would have if you had stayed closed. You paid your variable costs for today and had a little bit left over to put towards your rent. And remember, whether you're in the red zone, the yellow zone, or the green zone, you got to pay your fixed costs. So you got to pay your rent anyway. So the question is, should I operate today or not? And the answer is, can I pay my variable costs today or not? You'll shut down if you can't cover your variable costs, and you'll open if you can. So I like to go to my little gopher to think about how this works. In the yellow zone, if you're in the green zone, no brainer, you're good to go. You're definitely going to pay your rent and your variable costs for today, right? The question marks come sort of at the red zone and yellow zone. And in the red zone and the yellow zone, you're going to end up in a hole, because the red zone and yellow zone are where you cannot cover your average total cost. You can't cover your fixed cost. You can't cover your rent in that case, or your mortgage, right? And so you're going to be in a hole if you're in the yellow zone or the red zone. If you're anywhere below your average total cost curve, it means you can't cover all your fixed costs. You're going to be in a hole. Your goal, though, is to be in the shallowest hole possible. In the red zone, it means your variable costs are higher than your marginal revenue, higher than the price. So the hole is going to be your entire rent and some of your variable costs. You can't even afford to pay the guy to stand there, right? You're losing money to have him stand there. And so you're operating today increases your variable costs and digs your hole deeper. In the yellow zone, however, your total costs are greater than your price, but your price or your marginal revenue is greater than your average variable costs. So revenue from operating covers all of your variable costs, and then even helps to fill in some of the hole created by the fixed costs, right? You won't be able to pay all of your bills, all of your rent, but you can pay some of it with what's left over after you finish paying the guy to work there today. Right, so does that make sense? So in the red zone, you don't want to operate because you're just adding to your costs today without adding enough to your revenue to operate in the red zone. In the yellow zone is where you actually will have enough money to put a little bit toward your rent, even if you can't pay all of your rent. So think about the gopher. You want the shallowest hole possible. So in the short run, the shutdown rule is this. If the price is greater than your average total cost, green zone, you're making a profit, go for it. And then down at the bottom in the red zone, if your variable cost, your average variable costs are greater than your price, red zone, you can't even pay the guy to work there today, you should shut down today, right? And the yellow zone says, I can pay the guy I'm hiring to work today, I can pay the electricity that we use today, and have a little bit left over to put toward my rent. So let's operate in order to minimize our losses. Shutdown rule is shut down if the price or marginal revenue is below average variable cost. That's the shutdown rule. Otherwise, you'll operate. This means that in the short run, your supply curve is zero anywhere below the bottom of your average variable cost curve. Zero. You won't produce anything. You'll shut down as long as the price is below the average variable cost curve, right? What's the rest of your supply curve? Remember what a supply curve tells us. A supply curve gives us the relationship between price that you can sell your product for and the quantity of the product you'll produce, right? And if you think about, go back toward the beginning of the chapter and think about the profit maximization rule for a firm. The profit maximization rule says that we'll produce as long as we'll produce the quantity up to the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. For a firm in a perfectly competitive market, marginal revenue is the same thing as price. So for a firm in a perfectly competitive market, the price equals marginal cost at the quantity we produce, right? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This means that the marginal cost curve is the same thing as the supply curve for the firm. Because if I put a price on here and I tell you the price is $10, then you tell me how many I'll produce, right? And you'll tell me how many I'll produce by looking at where that price of $10 crosses the marginal cost curve, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's the same thing that a supply curve does for us. It shows us, if I tell you a price of $10, the supply curve tells you how many you'll produce. See the relationship? The marginal cost curve tells us how many we'll produce at a given price, just like the supply curve tells us how many we'll produce at a given price. The marginal cost curve is the same thing as the supply curve for a firm, as long as the firm is operating, right? So we have the little caveat that our supply curve is zero beneath the bottom of the average variable cost curve, because that's where we're shutting down. And then above that, the marginal cost curve is the same thing as our supply curve. It tells us how much to produce at each given price. How does this change in the long run? Well, in the long run, remember the difference between short run and long run is that variable costs or fixed costs go away. In the long run, if I give you long enough to adjust, you can adjust anything. You don't have any fixed costs. You can sell your firm, your building, and move somewhere else. So you can get rid even of your mortgage, right? All those things that used to be fixed costs in the short run are now variable. Everything's variable in the long run because you've given enough time, you can change anything. And so in the long run, the picture changes. We no longer have an average variable cost curve and an average total cost curve. We just have the average total cost curve because there's no difference between variable costs and total cost. There is no such thing as fixed costs in the long run. And so we end up with this picture that gets a little simpler. We only have the average total cost curve. And so we'll shut down in the long run, meaning leave the industry. We'll shut down anytime that price is beneath the average total cost curve. And other than that, As long as the price is above the average total cost curve, our supply curve, the little LR meaning long run here, our supply curve is the same thing as our marginal cost curve. So in the long run, that shutdown criteria becomes this. If your price is greater than your average total costs, you make a profit, you're good to go. If the price is less than your average total costs, you are in the red zone and you should shut down. This really is the exact same rule as the short run rule. If you think about the fact that in that long run, your total costs are the same thing as your variable costs. Every cost is variable in the long run. And so if the price is below your variable costs, you shut down. In the long run, that those variable costs just are all of your costs. So the price is below all of your costs, your average total cost, you'll shut down.